All right, fifth graders, we are going to be painting our illustrations onto our stools today. So to start, you are going to get your sketch and your image that you have of your character back, and you and your group are going to have to draw the picture in pencil on your stool. I will tell you this is a little tricky because it's always difficult painting on a surface that's not paper. So if you have to do some erasing today, that's not a problem. It took me a couple tries to get Harold and his head to look exactly like my image. Once you have your image in pencil, you want to start to think about the background. So when I look at this picture, the background is all this white stuff around it. On my stool, I know we painted these white with a primer, but it's not very nice. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the background. I want to think about that thing that is the furthest behind. So for me, that's white. So you're going to get your plate today, and it will have the colors that you listed. So I'm going to paint around Harold with this white. I am trying to smooth out the paint. I don't want big gobs left. And I'm using a fairly large brush for this because the background is pretty big. So if I do this first, the next thing I'm going to look at is what comes next after the background. So I would suggest that you and your partners plan this out. I'm going to start with white. The next color I'm going to go to is the peach and the blue. The last colors I'm going to do are the black outline and the purple crayon. Probably the purple crayon even first, because if you can see there's black on top of the purple. So you want to think about it in layers. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to continue to paint this white, and then I will show you my next. All right, I have the background painted white, and it took me several coats, going over some spots 3 or even 4 times because they were still really dark. So the background is all white. I'm ready to look at that next layer on top of the background. So I'm going to go with peach and then blue. For this part, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush because I am going to be painting a smaller area. And this peach is a little bit of a thin color. So I'm going right over the mouth line. I will just paint that back on top of it. But I can tell already that this paint's so thin, I'm going to need a couple of layers of it. And I'm just trying to make that edge between the white and the peach really nice. And I want to think about smoothing out that line or all that paint so that I don't have gobs of it on there. That's a gob. Scoop that off. So I would suggest that you and your group work together painting the background. And when you get to the next part of painting your character, you could definitely kind of separate. I could have one person painting the peach of him and another person or another 2 people painting his blue clothes. So I'm going to finish that up, and then on my plate, I do not have that light blue color of his clothing. So that's a color I'm going to have to mix. So you and your group are going to have to work together on figuring out how to get the colors to look as good as possible. I know that I'll probably have to use a little bit of blue in the white to get that light blue. When I come back, I'll be on to the outlining part. All right, I have all that paint filled in, and I'm ready for the outlining part. So your group will have a couple of choices for this part. If you would prefer to paint with a really small paintbrush, the outlining or the last step, you could do that. If your group would prefer to use a black marker, a permanent marker, a Sharpie, or even a thicker marker from the art room, you can do that. We will just have to blow dry your stool really well. I'm going to be brave, and I'm going to use a paintbrush. So if you would rather use a permanent marker, we will blow dry over at the sink by the window. And we'll try to get it as dry as possible. So this part requires a really steady hand if you're using the paint. And I'm just going to go around all of the body and the head of Harold and add those details in his head. So when I come back, it will be almost finished. All right, I am on to the very, very last details here. I've gone around and I've really been using this edge to kind of brace my hand so that I have a steadier hand with the outlining. So I'm just adding his hair right now with this still very thin brush And he's got a tiny little smile line. And I forgot his ear. That kind of smeared in with the peach, so I'm going to take my time and I'm going to go right on top of that again, making sure I get that nice dark line. And he's got a couple little details in his ear. And just for fun, my image has him writing the title of this book. I am going to wash my brush really well, and I am going to add just a little bit of a purple squiggle, making sure my brush is washed out, cleaned, and I really squeezed the extra water out of that. And I'm just going to have him be writing. If you've read this book, you know that Harold actually draws all of the pictures in the story as he walks through it. So my stool is done. It's going to go by the outside door to dry so that nobody sits in it. We are not signing our names today. We'll do that next week when they are really dry. You are responsible for throwing away your paper plates and bringing your water cups and brushes to the sink. So water cups, you can just pop the lid off by curling your fingers under. Pop that off, get some clean water in it. And the brushes, you will have to really scrub on your hand. So that means the water is on at the sink and you are rubbing the brush in the water to get that paint out and stacking them with the bristles up tall. You don't want to put the bristles down because it will bend the bristles. Once you've done that, you can move on to free time or finishing any other projects.